Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in a single, really powerful issue of the Journal of Educational Impact. It's Volume 2, Number 1, from 2025.
That's right. And we're pulling out three major threads. They're pretty interconnected, actually.
Yeah, they define where K-12 education is, well, struggling, and also where it's actively trying to transform itself.
And these studies, they seem quite diverse at first glance. You've got tribal nation programs, urban high school crises,
A real mix.
a real mix. But they share this crucial thematic link. They all look at how education really must serve as a vehicle for cultural affirmation, for equity, and ultimately for transformation.
So the core message seems to be,
If you boil it down, it's that the system needs to stop just talking at marginalized communities. It needs to start genuinely listening to them.
okay. So our mission today is to kind of synthesize these findings, give you high-level takeaways.
Yeah, unpack what's really going on.
We'll start by exploring a pretty unique cultural leadership program. It's about strengthening Indigenous identity.
Then we'll shift gears a bit.
Right, to the really sharp inequities that got exposed during the peak of pandemic remote learning.
A tough time for many students.
Definitely. And finally, we'll look at how culturally responsive teaching, or CRT, might reshape our history classrooms.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start with that first one. How tradition is being actively cultivated through modern development, specifically the Choctaw Nation Princess and Royalty Program.
Yeah, this first study is a great place to kick things off.
Yeah.
Because like you said, if you just hear Native American princess pageant, you might get the wrong picture.
Right, like a standard beauty contest.
Exactly. But the researchers, they immediately make it clear that this Choctaw Nation program is something much deeper. It's a mechanism for, well, rigorous cultural education, for strengthening tribal identity. The authors even call it a cultural tether.
A cultural tether. I like that. It sounds less like a contest then and more like a formalized leadership development academy.
That's a good way to put it. The Choctaw Nation clearly sees this program as vital for molding what they call strong Chaka Ohoyo, or strong Choctaw women.
And the key seems to be the structure. There's a mandatory part, the Princess in Training program, a formal educational piece.
That training component is really where the substance lies. Participants, they have to learn traditional skills, history, the Choctaw language.
It sounds pretty intensive.
It is. The level of detail required is, frankly, striking.
Yeah.
One example they cite is needing to learn how to sign the Lord's Prayer in Choctaw.
Wow.
And get this, the judges are often tribal elders. They're not just looking at, presentation skills.
Well, no.
No, they're assessing cultural knowledge and, importantly, authenticity. They can apparently spot rehearsed answers versus, genuine understanding pretty easily.
That makes the role incredibly significant then, like a living ambassador of history almost. But, when you talk about elders assessing authenticity, it does raise a question for me. Does the research suggest any tension there? Like, could focusing so heavily on traditional authenticity maybe sideline more modern expressions of Choctaw identity among the younger participants?
That's a really interesting point. The study suggests the program actually tries to bridge that gap, not widen it. It's implicit in the expectations of the role.
Okay.
Look at the three main outcomes they identify. First, there's personal growth. Transforming someone who might be shy into a confident public speaker, someone who can advocate for the nation in the modern world.
Right, blending tradition with current needs.
Exactly. And the second and third themes really hit that cultural mandate. The princesses act as cultural educators.
Passing knowledge on.
Yeah, through things like workshops on traditional pottery or language classes. And the third theme, Choctaw Values, focuses on instilling servant leadership.
Servant leadership, okay.
And this is critical. The philosophy is about we getting ahead, the community, which, contrasts pretty sharply with the individualistic focus on me that's often dominant in the surrounding culture.
That is a fundamental difference.
It really is. And one former Miss Choctaw Nation put it perfectly. She said she wanted people to know, and this is a quote, you can be a warrior. You don't just have to, powder your nose.
Powerful. She embodies both tradition and modern strength.
That's the idea, resilience and identity.
Okay, so that program clearly reinforces identity, builds resilience. Now let's pivot. We move from that sort of anchored sense of self into a period of just profound disruption, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, a huge external shock.
Which acted like an immediate, intense stress test on educational equity.
The fallout was just immense. Globally, school closures hit about 1.2 billion children. This particular study zooms in on high school students who were already overwhelmingly vulnerable.
Right, the demographics were stark.
Very stark. 93.2% were classified as low SES from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and 70.9% were Black students.
So those pre-existing inequities, things like having reliable internet or even just a quiet space to learn at home.
Exactly. Those became immediate, often insurmountable barriers in that emergency remote setting.
And the researchers, when they looked at why students were disengaging, they pointed to something critical, a lack of social presence.
Yeah, that feeling of connection, the interaction with peers, with teachers, it just vanished for so many kids.
It makes sense. Learning isn't just absorbing information, is it?
Not at all. And this is where we probably need to bring in a key concept the researchers cited, transactional distance theory, or TDT.
Okay, TDT, what's the core idea?
Well, the theory basically says that distance education quality depends on the interplay between three things: dialogue, interaction, structure, how the course is organized, and learner autonomy, how much control the student has.
Dialogue, structure, autonomy. Got it.
So when students felt that lack of social presence, what they were really experiencing, according to TDT, was a system failure. The highly rigid structure of many of those, pre-populated online courses.
Like edgenuity, which was mentioned.
Exactly. That structure basically overrode the necessary dialogue and really restricted their autonomy.
And the quantitative results, the numbers, they showed just how devastating this was, especially for final grades.
Yeah, it's pretty sobering. The mean final grade for white students in the sample was 76.63.
Okay, about a C average.
Right. But the mean final grade for Black students was 62.19.
Wow. That's more than a 14-point gap.
A huge gap.
Yeah.
Statistically significant, obviously, and it represents this massive widening of the achievement gap just during that crisis period.
And the engagement data connected directly to this.
It did. When they asked students about following behavioral rules online, the statement was something like, "I follow the rules of the online class."
Yeah.
40.4% of Black students reported they could not follow those rules.
40%, that's significant.
Significantly higher than other groups. And we have to be careful interpreting that, right? It likely wasn't about simple defiance.
No, it sounds more like symptoms.
Exactly. Symptoms of those deep structural barriers we talked about. Unstable internet, no support at home, maybe just struggling to navigate that overly rigid online platform.
Which the student feedback seems to support, the qualitative stuff.
Totally. I mean, sure, some kids like the independence, but the negative comments were really strong. Students talked about being bored, wishing they were in a real class.
And that one quote really stood out to me. Edgenuity does not teach, teachers do.
Oof. Yeah. That says a lot, doesn't it? It just confirms that the human element, the dialogue, the teacher support, those were the absolute crucial drivers of motivation. And the structured platforms, well, they just couldn't replace that.
Right. So that analysis, that failure of dialogue in the face of rigid structure, it feels like a crucial pivot point.
It really does. Because if these crisis-driven gaps show us where the system failed on that human connection, then the next logical step is to think about how we proactively transform the curriculum itself.
To center identity and inclusion from the start.
Precisely.
Which brings us neatly to the third study. This one focuses on integrating marginalized voices into history education, specifically through culturally responsive teaching, or CRT.
Yeah. And this research really stresses that the change has to start with the educators themselves. It found that a teacher's self-efficacy, basically, their confidence in leading diverse classrooms, was directly tied to how they perceived the school's overall diversity climate.
Yeah.
If the school culture actively supports diversity, teachers just feel more capable.
That makes sense. Support matters.
Absolutely. And it highlights action research where teachers study and improve their own practices as a really effective tool for boosting their cultural competence.
Okay, so teacher prep and school climate are key. What about the curriculum itself? What needs to be integrated?
The message there is pretty clear.
Yeah.
We have to move way beyond just tokenism, adding a paragraph here or a special month there.
Right, not just surface level.
No. It requires a fundamental inclusion of marginalized histories. They mention Latinx, Asian American, LGBTQ plus narratives as examples. The idea is that this kind of deep inclusion actively fights what the source calls racial illiteracy.
Racial illiteracy.
And it challenges those long-established historical power structures that have, frankly, usually only centered one main viewpoint.
Okay, but how do you do that effectively? How do you avoid just, adding another chapter to the textbook.
Well, what's fascinating here is the studies focus on intersectionality in the actual teaching methods, the pedagogy.
Intersectionality,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So they recommend approaches like autoethnography assignments. These encourage students to explore their own interconnected identities, gender, sexuality, race, within a safe classroom community.
So students reflect on their own complex identities.
Exactly. And that process naturally boosts empathy and insight, both for the student doing the writing and for their peers who are engaging with it. They even suggest using modern tech like UAVs, drones, as a tool for culturally sound teaching in, say, geography or history.
Drones. Interesting. How would that work?
Well, you can imagine mapping historical migrations or examining land use changes from different cultural perspectives using aerial imagery. It's about using tools in culturally relevant ways.
I see. Making connections tangible and the impact on students.
It's consistent with other CRT research. It boosts engagement, boosts motivation. Why? Because the lessons become culturally relevant. Students are just inherently more interested when they see their own cultures, their own identities reflected in what they're learning.
It makes the learning stick.
Makes it stick, yeah. But despite these clear benefits, the research is also honest about what we still need to figure out.
Okay, what are the gaps?
Well, there's still a documented need to really examine the long-term academic and social outcomes of CRT, and crucially, how to apply it effectively outside of social studies.
Ah, like in STEM fields.
Exactly. The authors specifically call for more research on culturally responsive practices within science, tech, engineering, math fields that are often seen as more objective, maybe, but still benefit from these approaches.
So a lot achieved, but still work to do, especially in broadening the application.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit. We went from exploring cultural resilience in the Choctaw program
Real anchor.
to witnessing that stark inequity magnified by the pandemic crisis.
Yeah, the system under stress.
And now we've discussed this potential path toward transformation through curriculum change with CRT.
So if we try to synthesize it all, what's the big picture? Education clearly acts as this powerful cultural anchor, like the Choctaw program demonstrates beautifully.
Right.
Yet the moment a crisis hits, it also acts like a magnifying glass, just amplifying those systemic inequities that were already there.
Yeah, the pandemic really laid that bare.
It did. And the clear, consistent pathway forward, which is affirmed across all three of these very different studies, is this urgent need to, 1, center student identity, 2, maximize human support and dialogue, and 3, move beyond tokenism towards genuine, deep curriculum inclusion.
That focus on dialogue, structure, and learner autonomy, those core bits of transactional distance theory we talked about with remote learning that really sticks with me.
Okay.
We saw in the pandemic how overly rigid structure could just crush the essential dialogue needed for real learning, especially for vulnerable students.
It absolutely did.
So here's something I want to leave you, the listener, with. A design challenge, really. How can educators, administrators, curriculum designers, tech developers, how can we all create learning environments, whether they're physical or digital, where the necessary structure, because some structure is needed, how can that structure exist without automatically compromising the essential dialogue and the crucial autonomy that all students need to thrive?
Especially those students most burdened by systemic barriers already.
Exactly. It feels like a fundamental question of, well, equitable educational architecture for the future. How do we build it right?
A big question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. That's the end of this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll talk to you next time.